Yahat, Marianne. So yat e to any Dene relatives in the crowd, yat e shik e Kisani, which means my Pueblo relatives as well. I just want to read a brief introduction of who the Pueblo Feminist Caucus is, who the Red Nation is, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce each of our panelists, and I'm going to give a brief description of their remarks. I'm going to give their bios in order of who's going to be speaking, in the order of who's speaking. So again, welcome to 3 Centuries of Pueblo Resistance, a panel sponsored by the Pueblo Feminist Caucus. So the Pueblo Feminist Caucus, or the PFC, is an official caucus of the Red Nation that was founded in February 2019. The Red Nation is a grassroots organization of Native and non-Native activists, educators, students, and community organizers dedicated to building a widespread movement for the liberation of Native peoples and all colonized peoples from capitalism and colonialism. The PFC first formed to address the specific forms of colonialism and heteropatriarchy that all Pueblo people face, and is committed to the liberation and uplifting of all Pueblo people, including men, but also centers women, LGBTQ2+, and gender nonconforming relatives. The PFC first formed for Pueblo Feminism Rising, a panel that took place during Gallup Pride in Gallup, New Mexico in 2018. And again for Mapping a Pueblo Feminist Movement, a panel that took place during the American Indian Studies Association conference at the University of New Mexico in February 2019. This panel, the American Indian Studies Association panel, was nationally recognized by Congresswoman Deb Haaland, who's from Laguna, right? She's from Laguna, Pueblo, during the 2019 State of the Indian Nations Address. In collaboration with the Red Nation Santa Fe, which is a new Red Nation Freedom Council here in Santa Fe that's been in existence since December 2018, the PFC continues their work this month in August 2019 with this panel, 3 Centuries of Pueblo Resistance. And this is the first time in Kewa territory that this panel and this conversation is taking place. This panel is in conjunction with Reclaiming Sacred Spaces, a march for Pueblo liberation, which is happening this Saturday, so in 3 days at 2 p.m. We're meeting at the Marcy Street entrance of the convention center, and then we'll be taking sort of an educational tour and a procession around downtown Santa Fe in an effort to reclaim Ogapolque, which is the Tewa word for what we understand as Santa Fe. Santa Fe is the colonial term for this place. And so this week, with this panel and then with the march on Saturday, the theme is about reclaiming this. And that's why the banner says, this is Pueblo land, and you're on Pueblo land. So really briefly, it's important to let folks know, especially our Pueblo relatives who are being directly affected by the issues that our panelists are going to be speaking about, that each of our panelists, and myself included, we speak on our own behalf. We offer our own perspectives, and that we don't have the power to give consent from or to our entire tribes to represent sort of a totality. Our perspectives, again, don't represent everyone. They are our own. And these are views that are made on behalf of the Pueblo Feminist Caucus. And I'll say as the chair of the Red Nation, also on behalf of the Red Nation. So we just wanted to make that really clear. So really quickly, before I go into the panelist descriptions, the bios, and the description of what folks are going to talk about tonight, I just want to make a comment. Again, my name is Melanie Yazzie, right? I'm the chair of the Red Nation. I'm also an assistant professor of Native American Studies at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. I received my PhD 3 years ago in the Department of American Studies at UNM, and I trained under the very first Navajo person to ever get a PhD in history. Her name is Dr. Jennifer Nez Dennett-Dale. And Dr. Dennett-Dale is also part of a cadre about 15 years ago when she was working, sort of recently minted PhDs, beginning her junior career as a professor at UNM and then at Northern Arizona University. She's part of a cadre of about a dozen, mostly women, some non-gender conforming indigenous people who are starting to claim indigenous feminism and queer studies, really, as something that Native American studies scholars and Native people out in the community at large and tribal governments should be taking seriously. And so there's been an incredible amount of work done within the Academy on Indigenous Feminist and Queer Studies. I myself, as you can see, my shirt says Radical Queer Indigenous Feminist. I myself do that kind of work. I teach those classes. And I was trained by one of the original Indigenous feminists. Dr. Dennett-Dale is a fierce, powerful, uncompromising, generous Indigenous woman who does this work, as are all of the people on this panel today. And I think what's really important, right, so this year, 2019, was proclaimed the Year of the Native Woman, I think is what it was called. That has problems and deserves critique for the political sort of perspective that's offered through that. But the election of Native women into Congress for the first time, I think the rising discourse around murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls we're seeing at the national level as well as in North America. This is also happening in Canada. And just hearing the term Indigenous feminism for the first time since I've been doing this for over a decade in community organizing spaces that were actually incredibly resistant in Indigenous communities to talking about gender and sexuality openly. This has really only been happening for the last year or so in the North American context, the political context in the context of social movements. And so the PFC, or the Pueblo Feminist Caucus, and the founding of the PFC, I think is part of this larger upsurge, right, in this larger movement of Indigenous feminist and sort of queer liberation struggles within the larger constellation of Indigenous liberation struggles in North America. And I'm incredibly pleased and excited and invigorated that the Red Nation is a part of this, right, and that we're bringing this here to Tewa territory. So that being said, I'm just going to give brief bios and panelist descriptions, and then we're going to get right into the meat of the agenda. So Jennifer Marley is who's going to be our first speaker. This is Jennifer, sorry, got to be formal. Jennifer goes by she, her, and Jennifer is 23 years old and from the Pueblo of San Ildefenso. She has been active in social justice organizing around Native American rights for 5 years. Jennifer has held nearly every leadership role in Kewa Club, which is the Native student organization at the University of New Mexico, including president for 2018-2019. She has been organizing with the Red Nation for 4 years and currently holds the position of political education desk on the Central Governing Committee at the national level of the Red Nation. In late 2018, Jennifer co-founded the Pueblo Feminist Caucus of the Red Nation to address misogyny and gendered violence in Pueblo communities. In May 2019, Jennifer graduated from the University of New Mexico with a bachelor's degree in Native American Studies, a second bachelor's degree in American Studies, and a certificate in Peace and Justice Studies. I also want to say that her undergraduate thesis won an award in the American Studies department. So Jennifer will be entering the American Studies PhD program at the University of New Mexico, like tomorrow, next week. And tonight, Jennifer will be speaking. I'll just read the description. Everyone knows about the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, but what is less known is that this rebellion didn't include just Pueblos, but also Apaches, Dene, and others who together drove Spanish invaders from the land. The history of solidarity did not end here. Often erased from history are the rebellions that would follow, where Pueblos, Acequia communities, and Genisaro people would rise up against U.S. occupation, taking up arms to protect the land. Alongside the uncovering of this continuous tradition of resistance to settler colonialism, Jennifer's presentation will also outline the history of Indigenous feminisms, looking to early Pueblo feminist scholar Paula Gunn Allen, and the many others who have understood that examining the Pueblo experience is vital to Indigenous feminist history. Theory, sorry. Next we have, applause? Sure. All right, next we have Justine Teba, who goes by she, her, them, or they. Justine is 26 years old and a member of Santa Clara and Tesuque Pueblos. She is a descendant of Acoma and Jemez Pueblos, Navajo Nation, and Jicarilla Apache Nation. Justine has lived the majority of her life throughout the Tewa Pueblos of northern New Mexico until moving to Albuquerque in the summer of 2018. She is a student at CNM and a grassroots organizer with the Red Nation, where she is a member of both the Santa Fe and Albuquerque chapters and a co-founder of the Pueblo Feminist Caucus. Her life is dedicated to the protection and liberation of all her people, which is understood to her as continued work from past ancestors and being a good future ancestor in the present. With this in mind, she critiques colonial structures and their impact on Pueblo traditionalism. Justine's panelist description. All right. So, what Justine is going to talk about tonight. The term toxic traditionalism, which she coined, was first presented on behalf of the PFC by Justine at the 2019 American Indian Studies Association conference at the University of New Mexico. Toxic traditionalism is being used by the PFC to describe the adopted changes from colonialism to the traditional structures that have been in place since pre-colonial contact. These not-so-traditional traditions have been especially harmful to Pueblo people, if not outright throwing Pueblo people on a trajectory towards their own genocide. Things like heteropatriarchy and blood quantum are products of colonization and are proving to be toxic to Pueblo life. It is Justine's hope that the lateral violence from toxic traditionalism is dissolved and Pueblo people can begin to decolonize their future. Let's welcome Justine. All right, our next panelist is Beata Tsosie-Peña, who goes by she, her, they, or them. Beata is from Santa Clara Pueblo in El Rito, New Mexico. She is a mother, poet, seed saver, and is certified in infant massage as a developmental specialist, an educator, and in Indigenous sustainable design. She is also a Green for All Fellow and has served on several local community boards. She is currently on the steering committee for the Traditional Native American Farmers Association and recently completed her training as a Hiavikagindi, or a full-spectrum doula. The realities of living next to a nuclear weapons complex has called her into environmental health and justice work with a local nonprofit organization, Tewa Women United, for over a decade. As part of her work with TWU, she is currently managing the creation of the Española Healing Foods Oasis Demonstration Garden Project. And tonight, her presentation description, Opide, I'm not sure I pronounced that Tewa word right, it's the Tewa word for braiding, describes an intersectional approach to address the lived experiences of Tewa and land-based peoples living within systemic issues of environmental violence. Environmental and reproductive health and justice is braided with cultural and spiritual strengths in continuation of intergenerational resistance and caregiving of our earth-honoring relations. Let's welcome Beata. Our next panelist is Nicole Martin. Nicole prefers she, her, they, or them. And Nicole is 27 years old from Laguna, Pueblo. She is currently the sex education developer and one of 3 co-founders for a grassroots collective called Indigenous Women Rising. She received her BA in Native American and Indigenous Studies with a minor in Gender and Women's Studies from Fort Lewis College. Her passion is to reclaim spaces that are safe to engage in dialogue about Indigenous sex, gender, and sexuality. And her presentation description. Since the colonization of the Americas, Indigenous communities have actively fought against colonial erasure and have mobilized to preserve our history, traditions, and autonomy. Central to this fight is defending the reproductive freedom of Indigenous communities. Nicole will address why there is a need to create an Indigenous-centered abortion fund and the policies that prevent Indigenous communities from full body sovereignty. Reproductive justice and health intersects to make sure our communities live their lives authentically and in the most loving way. Let's welcome Nicole. Ooh, Lori already stood up. So our last panelist is Lorelai Chavez, or Lori. Lori prefers she, her pronouns. And so Lorelai is 29 years old from Kewa, Pueblo. She is currently employed as a Native American liaison and Indigenous studies teacher at a public school within the Rio Grande Valley. She graduated from the University of New Mexico Native American Studies program in May of 2018 and has since been working on receiving her teaching certification through the alternative licensure program at CNM. Alongside pursuing an educational career, Lorelai is an advocate, passionate about assisting Indigenous youth with finding their voice, understanding their place in the world, connecting to their gifts and talents they were born with, and encouraging youth to give back to humanity. Furthermore, she is an activist who is involved in bringing light, awareness, and change to the many things that impact Pueblo country socially, environmentally, and politically. Her goal is to continue her work in education and to eventually become the first Pueblo superintendent of the school district she currently works for, and to earn a seat on the Sandoval County Commission to ensure that Indigenous people of the county are represented by someone who looks like them, as well as fights for the issues that are important to them. Let's welcome Lori. I forgot to read Lori's presentation description. I apologize. I will do so now. The majority of Pueblo students receive education from either BIA-funded schools or a public institution. But educators who serve Pueblo students rarely understand or discuss the impacts of colonization, patriarchy, and toxic traditionalism within the classrooms and schools. In her remarks, Lorelai will give her insight as a Pueblo public school educator, as well as address the influence of blood quantum on bullying, discrimination against youth who may not be traditionally or spiritually connected to their community, exclusion of youth who do not meet community standards of being Pueblo enough from language programs and cultural enrichment, inequity that exists within Pueblo communities for LGBTQ2 plus youth, and discuss suggestions for moving toward a better Pueblo world. Yeah, we can do that again. All right, so before we get into the brief presentations from our panelists, my understanding is that the PFC would like to unveil their manifesto, which is newly minted. So I think if it's okay with you all, I would like for all of the other PFC members to maybe stand up so that you're represented as this is being read, because we aren't the only PFC caucus members. Not the whole time, but, or just really quickly, just so we can recognize other PFC people in the room. Yeah.